Hi, I'm Eliane, and today I want to talk to you about your presser foot's pressure. This is a really important tool when you're quilting and when you're piecing your fabrics to make sure that your presser foot is applying the right amount of pressure to your fabric. We'll talk about the different kinds of pressure that you should be aiming for when you're piecing and when you're quilting. So let's start with piecing. When you want to adjust your presser foot pressure, on my machine, it's over here in the settings. I'm going to look at my presser foot pressure, which looks like a downward arrow on my foot. It's set to auto, but if at any point I feel like it's not applying the right amount of pressure, I can press the plus or minus buttons to adjust it. On your machine, this might be a knob on the top of your machine, and sometimes it's on the side. When you're piecing, you want to apply more pressure to your fabrics. That's because you have lighter fabrics and you don't want them shifting around under your needle. So we'll start sewing and we'll see how our pressure is, and we'll adjust it if we need to. If I feel like my fabrics are shifting a little bit, I'll apply a little bit more pressure. That's better. It gripped my fabric a little bit more and allowed it to feed through nicely. You should never feel like you're pushing your fabric through your machine or pulling it out. You should let the machine do the job, and if you feel like it's not, a good culprit might be your presser foot pressure. This also applies when we're quilting. Because when we're quilting, we're using more fabrics or heavier fabrics, we're going to want to apply less pressure. This is really important because when you have too much pressure is when you're pushing that fabric and you're going to end up with puckers in your quilting. A good way to test this before you start your next quilting project is to take out a piece of scrap quilt sandwich. So here I have my quilt sandwich, and we're going to test our presser foot pressure by feeding it across the quilting, feeding it across our fabric in opposite lines of the quilting that I've already done. As I'm nearing this corner, you might notice that there's some fabric bunching up near that seam. That means that my presser foot pressure is too great, and it's pushing that fabric too much, which will result in a pucker right at that seam. I'll keep sewing, and you'll see what I mean. So there's a bit of pulling here, and as I would continue to make lines, they're going to create puckers, and if you ever get that in your quilting, it means your presser foot pressure is too great. I'm going to go back to my presser foot, and I'm going to lower that pressure a little bit. I'm going to sew through this next line and see how it does. That one went much better. I had a nice even stitch that went across, and I didn't feel like it was pulling on the fabric as much. That's what you're looking for, and it's always a great way to test before you get to your quilt that you've spent lots of hours on to make sure that when you're quilting, you're going to have less frustration and a much happier time doing it. Presser foot pressure is just one of the things that might be causing issues in your quilting. Let's talk about some other ways that you might want to troubleshoot if you're having some issues while quilting. One thing is to use a walking foot. For demonstration purposes, I just have a regular foot, but a walking foot is always essential when doing any sort of quilting. Another thing to think about is your stitch length. When I'm quilting, I like to move my stitch length up to about a 3. It's nice and long, helping it to feed through all of the layers nice and even. A too close of a stitch, and it tends to push itself together and cause a little bit of tension. Something else to think about if you're still having some trouble is to take out your bobbin, take out your thread, and rethread your whole machine. Sometimes that can solve a lot of problems. While you're taking out your bobbin, you might want to look around the bobbin casing. Have you cleaned it in a while? That could be causing some issues in your quilting as well. And when you're starting a new quilting project, it's always a great idea to put in a new needle. A new needle is nice and sharp. It's going to pierce through all of that fabric nice and easily, creating that beautiful straight line quilting that we're after. So these are all things you want to check. If you're still having some issues, it might be your tension, and that might be something that you want to check your manual for.